Welcome to In the News for January the 13th, 2023. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Hey, Brett.
Jeff, I know what it means now to miss New Orleans. I had so much fun with you last week when we were together at your office in New Orleans, and wow, we miss it. I think we ate our way through the city,
yeah,
which was good.
We had a lot of fun together. That was great.
We certainly did. Thank you so much for all the hospitality on behalf of New Orleans, because I know you're a big fan of the city, and it was just a lot of fun being down there. You get to see your family and everything. It was good.
It was great. It was great. I know today is Friday the 13th, but I understand that you had a Friday the 13th experience earlier this week on, what was it, Monday or something?
Yeah. So we were driving back from New Orleans. So I'm up in Ohio. So we're driving back from New Orleans. It's about a 15-hour drive or so. So we split it up into 2 days. And so last Sunday we were driving home from New Orleans and everything was going great. And all of a sudden, about an hour, maybe an hour and a half south of Birmingham, we're on the interstate. I think it's I-20 or 59, right? I-59. And all of a sudden, my wife is driving and she says, Google Maps is telling us to go this weird kind of way out of the way, direction, and it's going to add 36 minutes to our trip. Why would we want to do that? Like, let's just stay on the interstate. And I said, okay, honey, I'm going to take a nap. So I wake up now we're about an hour south of Birmingham. And all of a sudden we're in completely stopped traffic. Oh. I have no idea what's going on, and we're on the interstate. Even worse, Jeff. I mean, this is almost the worst nightmare, the techie nightmare. I had no cell service. Oh. It was in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. I mean, almost literally. That could have been the city for all I know that we were close to. It was nowhere, Alabama. There was no cell service. So I'm trying to get on. We did have GPS signal, right? So Google Maps could at least see where we were, like on what interstate, but that didn't help us. Because it was obviously we were in traffic. We stayed on that interstate. There were no exits for 4.5 hours, Jeff. It was
that is a nightmare.
Absolutely brutal.
Oh my gosh, what a nightmare.
People are pulling off on the side of the road because they have to use the bathroom. I mean, people are like, there's cars pulling off on the side of the road because they're either overheated or they've run out of gas. Apparently there was a tragic accident, which we couldn't find out because I couldn't get access to anything online. I'm feverishly trying to get a signal somewhere. But there was a tragic accident and they had to completely shut down the interstate to investigate it. We ended up finally getting off on the side of the road. And I tell you, they were trying to shove all the traffic this one particular way, Jeff. But Google Maps said, hey, I guess this is what this does. Maybe we'll talk about this just real quick. Google Maps can tell of all the people using the Maps app. We were using Google Maps instead of the Apple Maps, but I'm sure it was pretty much the same. They said, if you want to go right instead of left, which is where everybody's getting directed, there's some way back in the country roads that you can take a roundabout way that you'll still add some time, but you're going to keep moving. And it'll actually shave a little bit of time if you went and turned left. And apparently there were several other people that were using Google Maps because there was like a whole caravan of us that were back in the boonies. I mean, it literally had to be the boondocks of Alabama because there was no other traffic except all of us coming off of this interstate. And it was just a brutal, brutal day. We made it home safe and sound, and that's what's important. And obviously, my heart goes out to the folks that whatever happened in that accident. I would never know because we weren't able to pass it, but it was brutal. It was brutal.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it because there's a lesson learned there for, folks, we always think about technology and iPhones and stuff on the podcast. I've been in that situation before where you're on the road and you're using CarPlay, and whether it's Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever, recommends that you do something that seems a little bizarre. And I will tell you my personal experience, and it sounds like for you, that's exactly what Google Maps did, and your wife ignored it the first time, thinking it was making the right decision, but followed it the second time when you went the crazy way. My experience has been, and again, it's not going to always be perfect, but it's usually to just go with that. And the thing is, you need to make split-second decisions because they will often say, get off the interstate in the next 1 minute. And you're like, that makes no sense to me. Why would I do that? But when we've done it on interstate trips, we have tended to follow it. And I will tell you, I've always felt like it made a lot of sense. Even though you add 20, 30 minutes from what you expected to be the trip, you're avoiding another hour of what it would have been if you had stayed on the interstate. I have often, and one thing that I've often do is if Apple Maps makes a suggestion, if we have time to do it, if I'm not driving, like sometimes if my wife is driving, the situation you were in, I will pull up Waze, the Waze app on my phone, which even though that's owned by Google, Waze, because it's so generated from user comments, you will often see people actually like typing, here's what's actually going on. I've been sitting here for 90 minutes, or I can see the wreck. You can actually get a lot more direct information that way. Of course, since once you tried to do something about it,
I would have loved to have done that.
That was not an option for you, but that's another thing. I mean, it's great that we have these devices like iPhones because they really can help you make smart decisions. But, that's the lesson learned is if you're driving, use your assistants, whether you use Apple Maps or Google Maps. And if they suggest something strange, seriously consider just doing it because they have a whole lot of data at their fingertips.
We made a family rule now for exactly that, Jeff. We're like, after we got off, we're like, we are doing whatever Google Maps says. That's where we're going to go. And it's a little scary to say that because you don't want to give full control over that. But after that experience, absolutely, we're doing that.
Yeah. They have more information than you do. Well, I'm sorry that y'all went through that, and it's a shame that it put a stain on your trip to New Orleans. But don't hold New Orleans responsible for what happens in the state of Alabama.
Kids,
That's
nothing against Alabama.
Always true.
My kids say they love New Orleans but hate Alabama. Now, nothing against Alabama. I love Alabama. I've been there many, many times, but man, they were just put out. Just quickly on that though, I will say in some cases, now I know you typically use Apple Maps, and I have stayed with Google Maps all the time, but I will say quickly, just in the opposite, Jeff, in some cases. And I think this is mostly like in an urban environment, right? It will say, hey, I want to go to, this other side of town, and Google Maps will provide direction. But in some cases, it's sometimes like off the beaten path. And, sometimes it'll
and I
offer
don't
some
follow
additional
those usually. Yeah.
Well, exactly. But I will tell you in some cases, what we have found is that Google will say, if you go this way, you're going to save time. But Jeff, it ends up like shaving off maybe 6 seconds, like off of, maybe the other way that you went. And so but again, now that you and I are talking about it, I think that's mostly like in an urban environment, to where there's a lot more turns and things like that. And they may just be, making that determination a little bit differently than if you were on an open, highway or something like that. But I tend to think, what are people using? And if Google Maps is taking all of this data from the vast majority of number of people, and same with Apple Maps, they can tell, like if you're pulling up to a stoplight, all of a sudden the blue road turns a little orange or it'll turn red, right? Just to indicate like, well, Google Maps, they recognize there are several people that are stopped here so that you're going to have to stop. And sure enough, our interstate was completely red the entire way when we were on the trip. But it's interesting to kind of see this evolution. I mean, just even CarPlay, in the past, I would have had a paper map or a big, huge honking paper atlas. And now today I'm complaining because, my CarPlay map, from Google Maps won't update. But it's pretty amazing that we have access to that information. Of course, as long as you have a cell signal.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that caveat, though. When you are in a city, I usually don't follow those advices because you may save 30 seconds on paper, but you add so much aggravation to your life on dealing with the small roads. Yeah. But on interstate travel, when the sort of thing that you were doing, vacation type travel, that's where I think you really go with the mass information that the Googles and the Apples of the world have.
Absolutely.
So anyway, good travel tip there.
Very good.
Start off with.
But it was a wonderful experience in New Orleans. So thank you again for all of your hospitality. Got to meet your family and everything.
That was great fun.
And it seems like, because of the way that the holidays happen, like last week was very nice and chill, but this week people are really getting back into work. And it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of news, but there's several stories that some stories for sure pointed to. I thought this was a nice one. We've talked many times about, is it live activities, right? On the iPhone 14 Pro with the dynamic island. Boy, that's a lot of techie geek speakers in there. But I didn't notice this, but you linked to a story for live activities for sports that's already built into the Apple TV app on your iPhone.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we often talk about how getting live sports scores is the perfect example of a good use of live activities for any iPhone running iOS
Right.
16, and for the brand new iPhone 14 Pro, if you also have Dynamic Island. And this article did a great job of explaining what the options are. I mean, in simple, you can just use Apple's TV app if the scores that you want are what the NBA and the MLB, so baseball, professional basketball in the United States. If you want scores beyond that, for example, NFL scores or stuff like that, you should use a third-party app, and they have the name of it in here. It's called Sports Alerts. I mean, there's many, but that's the one that I often give people the buzz. So this article, just in one specific place, if you want to take advantage of sports scores, live update, using the live activities feature, take a look at this, 6-paragraph article, and it tells you everything that you need to know.
I'm so glad you linked to this, because I will tell you, I've noticed maybe in like the last month, or maybe after I updated to 16.2 on this, that I would get notifications. I think in Apple News is where I first said, I want to follow the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? That's our NBA team here in Cleveland. And all of a sudden over the last month, I started getting notifications from the Apple TV app that says, hey, the Cavaliers are starting this game. Do you want to watch it? Tap into the Apple TV app. And I've just sort of ignored it because, number one, I'm not the biggest sports fan and, following it at all. And in fact, I was even thinking about maybe I should just turn off those notifications. I don't need them to come up all the time. But now I can't wait for the next notification, because I want to try this. I just would, it wouldn't give me the score or anything. It would just kind of say something like, hey, the Cavaliers and the Bulls, are going head to head tonight. Check it out on the Apple TV. And I would just dismiss those notifications. But I had no idea that I could go into the Apple TV app, and just like he says in the article here, who is this? Michael Simon, that you can go into that, you can tap follow the game, and then the score will pop up in your live activities in the dynamic island. He's got a nice picture here where it just shows. I can't wait to try this out now. I like this a lot.
Yeah, very cool. Cool stuff.
Very good on that. Okay, so then let's go from Apple iPhones to Apple Watch. Into a use. How did you say this in your post today, Jeff? You're like, something I didn't anticipate a use for the Apple Watch Ultra. But where is this? In Norway that they're doing this, I believe?
Well, the company looks at it there. I think they're selling it around the world, but yeah.
Why don't you explain? I can't even get my head wrapped around this completely, Jeff.
Well, apparently, so for whether it's private security or police, I mean, you would want to know if there are gunshots in an area. Not something that I think about very much, but I mean, obviously, if you're concerned about security, that's one thing you would want to know. So to know if there's gunshots in an area, you want to have some speakers, obviously, that can hear the sound and understand it. And they discovered that the Apple Watch Ultra has some really good speakers on it, some really good microphones on it, not speakers, microphones. Okay. And I'm sure you've noticed the same thing. And that also it's got pretty good battery life. And I'm sure you've noticed that as well. So they have this thing that they put together, a drone with an Apple Watch Ultra connected to it, so that it can fly around the area and just listen for gunshots, which seems silly, but I guess it's the best tool for the job. I mean, it's funny. What it really makes me think about, though, is that Apple did a great job with those components, that there was nothing off the shelf that they could do to make their own solution in a more economical way. But that to take advantage of the really great battery life and microphones, why not just snap an Apple Watch Ultra to the drone? I had never, I talked to you about this when you were in town last week, that I had never really seen an Apple Watch Ultra being used by a person until he came in town last week. And then, of course, and because you were there, my brother happened to be there too, and suddenly he's wearing an Apple Watch Ultra. So within a matter of days, everybody's wearing an Apple Watch Ultra around me.
That's right.
But I mean, from what I'm hearing from people, and certainly what I'm reading on the internet, is that the battery life actually is substantially better on the Ultra. So I guess it makes sense for that to be the tool of choice here. This is funny. I would have never expected the Apple Watch.
I guess I feel safer.
Task.
That if I'm walking around somewhere and there's a gunshot happening, that my Apple Watch can, tell me, although I maybe I would hear that first. They talk about it here. One of the reasons, like you said, is that the Apple Watch Ultra has an impressive 3 microphone array, which is designed to be better at hearing its surroundings. I mean, I guess I would like to think there's several other opportunities and options that you could use that 3 microphone array other than gunshots. But hey, if that's one of the things that can help people feel a little bit safer, then that's good.
Hey, Brett, before you move on, I'm just curious because on that microphone, I think it's also useful if people are in the wild and are using an Apple Watch without anything extra, like AirPods or something like that, to do phone conversations. Have you actually used your watch in like a Dick Tracy mode to have telephone conversations?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And how did that work? Okay. Yeah.
Great. In fact, more than impressive. In fact, I'm almost to the point where I'm like, why don't I do this more often? Because I just don't even think about it. I used to have my iPhone with me, and that's just what muscle memory, I'll pull that out. But I remember, the Apple Watch Ultra, when I got it a few months ago, this was the first Apple Watch that I actually added to my cellular plan, right? So number one, you didn't have to. You could still do it even without that. But I decided to add this separately to my cellular plan because I wanted to take advantage of some of those and just kind of, test out how that works. But I started, I think I remember running. I was in San Francisco and I was out running and I called my wife and she's like, sounds like you always do. Like it doesn't sound any different. Like you're on your phone. And I didn't even have my AirPods. I was just out running and I just was holding it up. I don't even know if you have to hold it so much closer, your wrist to your mouth or anything, but it was pretty impressive. I think if you're walking around and your arms are swinging, maybe people could tell that, it's not quite as good, but it was impressive. And it just even reminds me, like, I need to do that a little bit more.
That's great. Thanks.
We have talked about the iPhone crash detection. Is that what they call this on here? Car crash detection on the iPhone, which is great. And then immediately after that, we gave all kinds of warnings, Jeff, to people that this might go off if you're riding a roller coaster. This might go off if you have to brake suddenly, right, in the car. It seemed like there was another story we talked about. But today you linked to a story helpful for folks that might be on a snowmobile. If you're riding a snowmobile, you might want to disable that car crash detection. This was actually a pretty good story, a very thorough story about a snowmobiler in Minnesota.
Yeah. What was interesting is that the local authorities in Minnesota were talking about how they were complaining, really, that they had gotten a large number of false warnings because if your Apple Watch or your iPhone believes that you are in a crash, it has to be one of the newer Apple Watches or newer iPhones. But if it believes that you're in a crash, they will give you an alert on screen. And if you don't, tap that within a certain number of seconds, then they will call 911 to say it appears, here, this is the GPS location. It appears this person was in a crash. But apparently it was going off accidentally when people were riding snowmobiles. Have you ever ridden a snowmobile before, Brett? I've actually never. I live in New Orleans.
No,
so I don't know what a snowmobile is.
I can't say that I have.
You can't have it do that. But for those who live in Minnesota and use snowmobiles, I would imagine that they go up and down a lot. And so you have that impact and the noise. And I could totally understand as someone who's never been on a snowmobile that why that might be misinterpreted as a crash. And because of the noise, the person on the snowmobile might not even notice that their phone or their watch has told them that, we're about to call the authorities. So I understand. So, what the local 911 people were saying is if you're about to do an activity that is going to, have the potential to trigger this, whether it's skiing, that you're going to do a lot of quick and short stops and you might, or snowmobile, you can turn off the automatically call 911 function before you do it. Now, the problem is that ironically, you might actually be on a real crash when you're on a snowmobile, and maybe you would want the option. So,
but you definitely want it to go off, right?
Yeah, the key is to be, and one of the most funny parts of this article, and in fact, you noted this in our document notes for this podcast, is the last paragraph of this article says that ironically, right after the officials had talked to the reporter, they called back the next day to say, hey, by the way, right after we talked to you, we got one of these alerts and it was a real crash.
And it was a crash.
And we did go out there and we did save somebody. So that just shows that, yes, it's got false positives, but how important it is, but at least be cognizant of it. I mean, it's something that, and I think that's the advice for folks listening to this is if you're about to do an activity that has a high chance of false alarms, consider turning it off. On the other hand, in the appropriate circumstance where it's a little bit more on the fence, you might want to consider leaving it on. But I suspect that most folks won't even know that this is something to decide if you want to leave on or off.
I know. And that's the thing, Jeff. I would almost kind of err on the side of like leaving it on. Like, I don't want to have to remember to turn it off. Now, the other thing I guess I can just say, and I don't know if it was in this article or maybe another one that I was reading, it's like to just be aware, like if you do, somebody could have fallen off that snowmobile. So maybe it was like, they flipped over the handlebars or something and they were fine. They got back on, but maybe check your watch then at that point. I mean, I hate to
look out for those messages.
That.
Yeah. Right. I mean, even if you leave it turned on, just be cognizant of paying attention to your watch or your phone, because it's going to say on the screen, it looks like you've been in a crash. It's going to give you a countdown timer. If you at least remember that and are good enough about checking it, easier said than done, perhaps, if you're in a quickly moving snowmobile.
And that's the thing.
But that's, it's.
I guess my point is, just be more aware. Like these are services that are on, like that they are aware. Because I feel for them there. One of the quotes here from the law enforcement is, when we get a snowmobile crash, he says, we send rescue squad, law enforcement, different EMS personnel, ambulance, first responders, and a bunch of people. I mean, that's a lot of resources that could be taken away from other places. And I thought that was important too. And the last thing quickly I saw in here is, number one, they said somewhere in here, it's not just Apple Watches. I think they were just more in the news, right? He mentioned another product in here that I don't know if I was too familiar with.
Life 360.
Life 360, yes. That there's,
and I know a lot of people that use Life 360 because it works on both Android and iPhone. A lot of people, I know of a lot of parents that use Life 360 to track their children who have a mobile device. And of course, you can do that using the Find My feature in Apple as well. I haven't used Life 360, so this is I have heard anecdotally that the company gets a whole lot of data from your phone. So my only advice is I don't want to talk disparagingly about a company that I haven't used, but be aware before you sign up for Life 360. And if your family is in an all Apple environment where you don't need to worry about Android support, consider whether you actually need Life 360, because the Find My service may provide you with everything that you want. I know that Life 360 can offer some other advantages too. Like I think you can tell like how fast your child is driving almost in real time in case they were speeding, So there's advantages and disadvantages. But again, Life 360 apparently offers the same service that Apple does, and it can also trigger false alarms, much like the Apple service can. So.
The last thing quickly, like I said, this story I thought was very thorough, because not only those things we've just talked about, but they also did mention, several years ago, when the iPhone had built-in SOS functions, right? In other words, if you held down the side button or something like that, I mean, there's a way that you could trigger emergency
you can still do that,
phone calls, and you can still do that. But they were talking about that over the last couple of years, they've gotten several accidental emergency 911 calls just from that thing, not even the crash detection on there. So it's not, again, a brand new issue on this. But again, to me, I just feel like it's the awareness aspect of that. Like, know that there are some of these tools that are available on there. I mean, I even go so far as to say, when you get in and setting up like a medical contact, an emergency contact in your phone. I mean, all of that is sort of the bigger picture, I think, of some of these emergency components on there. So anyway, just a great story. I'm glad that you linked to that as well. Well, if you're looking for a parking spot for your snowmobile, this is another good story, or your car or your vehicle. I usually get notifications like when I park my car, and usually I like to park pretty far away in a parking lot and I walk to the store or something like that. I'll get a pop-up sometimes. I feel like it's not as consistent, but it'll tell me, hey, you left your car here, or here's your parking spot. But it looks like this article you linked to today from Chance Miller was talking about maybe the iPhone connecting with a service called Spot Hero. I wasn't even aware of this, but could be something interesting to help you find a parking spot and get back to it.
Yeah, the idea is that, and this is just rolling out for the iPhone, but if you're going to a specific, popular destination, you can find that destination in the Apple Maps app. And then on the little side, there's a button with the 3 dots on it. And if you press that button, one of the options it will give you is nearby parking. And then it will recommend, and Apple Maps doesn't know this, but the third-party service called Spot Hero, this is what they do. They're a one national service that connects with lots and lots of different local parking things, and they will say, there's a parking lot that's a quarter of a mile away, and it has spots available, and you can pay for the spot through the Spot Hero app. I was investigating this week. Although New Orleans is a city that supposedly Spot Hero supports, I haven't yet seen this rolled out to my specific iPhone, even when I selected some very obvious popular locations in New Orleans. But I haven't seen this on my own phone yet, but I presume it will be rolling out. But I did look into the Spot Hero service, and it looks like a pretty good service. The rates,
well
one of the things that was interesting is the rates that they charge for parking seem to me, from my little investigations, to be the exact same or within a couple of cents of what you would have gotten. So like, let's say, for example, you actually find a parking spot and you pull in there and they have like a sign saying to park here, either text this number or use our app to pay, and, those sorts of things. The rates that Spot Hero is offering are completely competitive, which means that they must be making up their money by like getting a discount from the parking company and then making up, however it is that they're making their money. Maybe there's some small fees attached, but so it looks like a reasonable alternative that if you just don't even know where to park, use this feature, whether you use the app on its own or whether you use the built-in Apple Maps integration, and it will help you find a spot. Now, it's not going to hold a specific spot, so it's not going to be like pull into the parking lot and pull into spot 15. But what they do is they say that they keep they in real time, they keep track of the overall inventory. So they should generally know, this parking lot currently has about 16 spots available. On the other hand, if they're being told that there's no inventory available, they won't recommend it. At least that's how it's supposed to work.
Interesting.
In their FAQ, they say sometimes they make mistakes and they apologize for that, but they try to use the best information they have. So, the bottom line is, if you're going someplace, you're unfamiliar with the area, you don't know where to park, this app can recommend a close by parking spot and allow you to pay for it, so that by the time that you get there, your spot's available. And so, and as I understand, you can even pay for it early. So you could be 20 minutes away and say, I'm paying for the spot now. Of course, they're going to start to charge you now. So the 3 hours that you've paid for begins immediately, but you'll know that when you get there ought to still be a spot available for you, because they're supposed to, be connecting with the local service. So anyway,
I appreciate you.
It's another option to consider. I didn't even realize that this service was available. So it's nice to know it's an option.
I love it. I will definitely start looking into this. Thank you for explaining that. Well, if you own a parking lot or a business where you can, or any other business, first of all, if you own a parking lot, reach out to Spot Hero. That sounds like a really nice, kind of an option there. But the second thing you should do is now make sure you go and use Apple's free Business Connect tool so that you will show up in the Apple Maps. I think this is great because it sounds like this is something Google Maps has had for a long time. That's great that it's coming to Apple Maps now.
Yeah, if you're a business owner, hopefully years ago, you have found your business on Google Maps and you've filled out the form that they have to prove that you own the business. And then so you can, provide specialized information such as your hours or, whatever information, picture, whatever you want to provide to make your business more attractive. And so it now seems that Apple Maps, I have to admit, Brett, when I saw this story, my first reaction was, Apple hasn't been doing this already.
Same,
yeah,
exactly.
So then my second reaction is, well, if you didn't do it yesterday, at least you're doing it today. So going forward, if you wanted to be able to improve your listing in Apple Maps, which you should do because a lot of people use it, take advantage of this feature.
Like you said, hopefully you've already done this on Google Maps on there, because I got to tell you, Jeff, I've seen sort of a shift in myself, and I've even been trying to convince my wife. When we were looking, in the past, a couple of years ago, if we were looking for a restaurant, we would open up Yelp, right? A lot of people go to Yelp on there. But I got to tell you, I have almost now completely stopped going to some of those other apps similar to that. And I will, if I'm looking for a restaurant or if I'm looking for a specific business, I will open up Google Maps. That will be the first place that I will start, because exactly kind of along the lines of what you said, not only will it have the information about the restaurant, for example, it'll have the hours that it's open, and it'll tell you even if they've checked on these hours within the last, several weeks or something like that. It'll have access to the reviews. Many times it'll have access to the menu, right? Without even having to go to the restaurant's website, even if they have a website or something like that. I used this a lot even last week when we were in New Orleans, although we sort of had a plan of exactly where we're going to go anyway, and we knew that. But there were some stores or places we wanted to go, and just to double check about their hours, instead of calling them, I would open up Google Maps, type in the name of the store, and then I would have that information there. And of course, then you can immediately just do map to directions. So that's even more so why when I saw the story you linked to today, I'm like, what? That's not even available in Apple Maps. Obviously, I don't jump into Apple Maps quite as often, but I'm glad that now the website here is beautiful, that you can read through, you can get started. You have to have an Apple ID, I believe it says, or create a new Apple ID for your business. And it seems like it's a pretty easy thing to go and set it all up. And boy, if you have a local company or a business of some kind, like a store or something like that, by all means, you need to make sure you get this done.
And to be clear, Apple Maps does have some of that information now, like hours and stuff, and they do work with Yelp. So, I mean, it does have some of it. It's just that, if you're a business owner, you want to you want to get the most out of the experience. And that's what I encourage people to do.
Your last little video, when I first saw this, Jeff, I was like, is this going to be sad? And then I realized it's an Apple video, so it can't be that bad.
That's correct.
I don't want to give any spoilers here because everybody needs to go watch R.I.P. Leon.
It is worth spending 30 seconds to watch this.
I'm not going to play it here because sometimes YouTube and Apple doesn't like it when we play the videos on here, so no worries about that. But it's worth the 30 seconds to go and watch R.I.P. Leon. But what it's showing is a little ad for how to unsend text messages, which I know we've talked about, but I love how you just emphasized here in your post today that just keep in mind this is a great this is a great option, a great feature, but it's only going to work if your text message recipient is also running an iPhone and also has iOS 16, like they've done all the updates on that.
Or a Mac with the latest version of the Mac OS Ventura, they can do it too. But if you're texting with someone on Android, if you're texting to someone using a PC or something like that, then it won't work. But I will tell you that, and I haven't actually used the unsend feature very often, but the corollary to unsend is the edit message feature. And I actually use that one quite a bit because you have your big thumbs and you often make silly mistakes. And sometimes it's just me correcting something because I'm a type A person and I have to feel like my message was correct. But sometimes it actually gets the wrong word. And so you're conveying the wrong information and you don't want the other person to be confused. And it's nice that instead of then sending a second text with an asterisk and explaining something, you can just go back to your original text and you can edit the word that was incorrect and fix it. So I like that feature. I've been using it quite a bit since iOS 16 came out. I'm a huge fan of it.
And it's really nicely integrated. But Jeff, do you know, like if I try to unsend a message that I sent to an Android user, does it tell them that I tried to unsend it, or does it just not do anything? Like I
actually think it does. I think it's sort of like, but I haven't tested this myself. Yeah, it reminds me of sometimes I'll get a message through an email that says, so through Microsoft Exchange, so and so wants to unsend this email.
Right.
And of course, the first thing that makes you do is say, I should go look at that email.
I gotta look at that email now.
Yeah, exactly. If I wasn't going to read it before, I am now.
I'm doing it now. Good. Okay. Well, anyway, go to Jeff's blog, and I'll obviously have a link in the show notes there. You can watch. I don't know if is that a frog? Is Leon a frog or a chameleon or something? I can't even tell.
Yeah, I don't know what
on there. But anyway, go and watch it. In the know. So I know that we have almost beat the password horse to death several times over, I feel like, Jeff, but we're not done yet.
Yeah, and it was worth it, Brett, because the LastPass hack that we talked about extensively last week was a really big deal, and people need to understand it. So I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, because I totally agree. And in fact, a couple of people that we know, mutual acquaintances in the legal technology industry, have written some excellent articles, with many other articles, right, that have come from the general technology world about the LastPass breach. What could you do? What should you do now? And in fact, I'm glad that I read some of these because I did have a LastPass account, Jeff, but I rarely ever used it. And I got to tell you, reading some of these articles this past week, I'm like, oh, I need to, first of all, immediately go and change that LastPass password. And I need to make sure that I change the passwords for the several accounts that I did have in LastPass. I actually was trying to just close out the LastPass account completely, but I didn't. I did actually make a new password for LastPass. Do you know where I saved that new password for LastPass?
Let me guess.
In one password. So, anybody that's been listening to us for a while knows that both of us, you and I, are big fans of 1Password. We have been using it. I think I looked it up last week, Jeff, that I've been using it since 2008 or something crazy like that. It used to be Mac only. 1Password has continued to grow as a company, and now they are all platforms, and it works seamlessly. They've gone to a full cloud integration now, where I remember the first time that I had it, it was like a physical synchronized, and then I used Dropbox at some point, and it was kept safe that way. Last week, we talked about a blog post on 1Password from their chief security officer, or something that I can't, chief security guru, whatever he was, that he did an excellent balanced job, I thought, of explaining some of the stuff going on in LastPass, and as a competitor, how does 1Password do things differently? There's no shortage of information out there other than the fact that if you are a LastPass user, I would just plead with you to at least take 20 minutes out of your day, or maybe over the weekend, to read some of these articles and to do the right thing of either change your passwords in LastPass right now. I know it's going to take some time, but it is absolutely worthwhile to do to stay secure. Or if you are considering switching from LastPass to 1Password, I'm not specifically saying that, but I am not ashamed to say that I'm a huge fan of 1Password, and I have been for many, many years. But I got an email newsletter from the developer of 1Password, Jeff, and I'm sure you did too. And he just made a comment on here, which I just thought was interesting. I didn't know that 1Password has a switch page, which I think they've always had up there. But over the last few weeks, this has become much, much more important, because one of the things, and this is my tip that I wanted people to know, if you are considering switching from another password manager, doesn't have to be LastPass, it could be Bitwarden, it could be KeePass or Dashlane. There's several of them out there, right? But if you are already paying for another password manager and you are considering switching to 1Password, 1Password will actually pay the remaining balance of your old password manager. Now, some people I think would look at that and say, "Hey, that's a cute marketing move," and I kind of agree to that a little bit. But because this has become such a huge news story over the last several weeks with LastPass, if you've even been thinking about it, it might be worthwhile to take advantage of this over maybe over the weekend. This is a page from 1Password. I'll put in the show notes. It's onepassword.com/switch. And they go through, they actually even give you the different security features, comparison, with other platforms. And then they just give you the capability there to start the switch over. You can even do a trial component on there if you're ready to switch. Or if you have a current invoice for your old password manager and you want to subscribe to 1Password Business or 1Password Families, which is what I would typically recommend, you can send 1Password your current invoice and they'll pay the remaining balance. I just thought that was neat. Again, I know that this has been around for a while, so it's not just in response to the LastPass fiasco, as it were. But if you've been thinking about it, this is where I would recommend onepassword.com/switch.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I didn't even know that they made that offer or that it's been around for a while. And that makes sense, because if your brain thinks it might be time to switch, don't let the fact that you have like $50 or $40 invested in LastPass be a reason not to move over. So that's great.
Well said.
So following up on your tip, so I have a 1Password tip today too.
Oh, good.
Is once you've made the switch, or for your folks currently using it, 1Password changes itself, all the time to try to be better. And one of the things that they did last year was they changed the interface in 1Password 8. And I talked about it on iPhone JD back in August of last year. I've now been using that interface for a couple of months. And I'm here to say that there are some things I like and some things I don't like about it. And so I have a tip for getting around the things that you don't like.
Oh, good.
What I don't like about it is that it can be harder to find some things. In the new layout, for example, there's only 3 buttons at the bottom. And one of those 3 buttons, or maybe 4 buttons, but one of those buttons at the bottom is their Watchtower feature, which is interesting. I mean, the Watchtower is nice because it helps to alert you if you have a password that should be replaced and stuff. But I personally don't think it's important enough to deserve one of those 4 spots at the bottom. It's something that you might use every once in a while, but I wish it was more, I wish they had used that spot to make things more accessible. And on the other hand, one thing I used to do in the old 1Password is I would say, I want to look at one of my secure notes, which is just like a note, like you might have the Notes app, but it's one that's protected by 1Password. And it used to be a lot faster to get to secure notes, or it used to be a lot faster to get to social security numbers or whatever. And now that's a couple more layers deep. Thank you. So I don't like that about the new interface. However, there's a workaround, which is this. 2 things that I do like about the new interface is the new home feature, which is the first tab at the very bottom. And it's where you'll probably start when you start the app. And so if you go to the home tab and you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a big button that says customize, and you can actually decide what appears in the home app. And my first recommendation is pay attention to that and decide what makes the most sense for you and use that order. The version that I have is I have pinned fields at the top. I'm going to come back to that in one second. I have pinned fields at the top, and then I have favorites, which I'm going to come back to too. And then I have recently created, because there's a good chance if there's a new service that I just signed up for a week or 2 ago, that's a password I'll probably want to go back to recently. And then some of the other things they have are frequently used, recently used, recently modified. You can decide for those other ones
tips
where you want them to be in the list. But the point is you want the things that are most important to you to be at the top. Okay. Now, here's my pitch. So my first pitch is reorganize the list. Second, I recommend that pinned field goes to the top. And let me tell you what this is. Favorites and pinned fields are two different ways that you can take information that you want to have easy access to and make it easy to get to it. If you make something a favorite, you're making the entire entry a favorite. Your username, your password, your one-time key if it changes every 30 seconds, your everything that you have about your Amazon account, everything you have about whatever the service is, that is a favorite. Pinned, on the other hand, is just for one piece of information of an entry. So for example, what I find is, so here's an example. I often have to type in my iCloud password on my Mac or on my iPad or something like that. Every once in a while, Apple asks you for that. I don't need to see my iCloud account. I know what my user account is. Apple knows it. The thing that they ask me for is the password. So that's the one part of that entry I'm always going back to. And so what I said is, within my entry for iCloud, I just held down on my password for about a second or two, and a pop-up menu comes up, and one of the choices is to add it to pin the field.
Pin to home.
And then when I go to the home field at the very, very, very top, I have a little entry that specifically is for that pinned information, and I can, just tap it and I can see it. So that way, it's the one thing I want. I don't care about the rest of the information on iCloud. I just want that password, and I've got it at top. But then right below that, my next tip is that's where I have favorites. And so for some things that I actually do want to have everything that I have about Amazon or whatever the service is, I just want to access the entry, put that in the favorites. And if you go through and find the ones that you use most often and put them in either pinned or favorites, you can get to the point, and I've gotten there now, where 95% of the time, the information that I want, whether it's from a password, whether it's from a secure note, whether it's a social security number, the things that I use most often, I either have them pinned or as a favorite, which means that I can easily access them. And for the things that I use for the other 5% of the time where I want something else, I usually just use the search feature, which is one of the tabs at the bottom. And I just tap on search and I do a search for, Pacer or whatever, to find my Pacer password or whatever it is I need. And so that way I've completely avoided having to browse and go through the multiple different menus to find what I need. So, so this is, I've been using this new interface since last August, and this is what I found works for me. So if you're using 1Password and you're frustrated that sometimes when you're trying to find something, it takes a little bit longer than you would hope, take advantage of the pinned fields and the favorite features, and hopefully that will solve things for you like it did for me.
Thank you, Jeff. That is fantastic. Because those of us that have been using 1Password for a long time, this was a fairly drastic change in the interface. And like you, I just haven't been able to take the time to really understand. I usually just go in and do the search on this. But thank you. That is so helpful. Number one, because there were some nice tips, but it's big little cards at the top that are the tips. But now I could turn those off, or I could put them
turned off tips because I don't need 1Password telling me tips all the time. Or you might want to put it at the bottom. I'll give you another example of one. One more example of one that I pinned because it may help you think of things for yourself. I have a Google Voice account, which is just like a dummy phone number that I sometimes will give out to somebody if they want to ask my phone number, because I don't want to give them my quote unquote real phone number. So I just give them that. But because I never really use it, I always forget what that number is. So I have just that specific number pinned at the top, so that when I need to give someone that number, I can just open up 1Password, give them that number, and that way, if the third party decides to sell that number to a whole bunch of other people, I could care less because I never really pay attention to it. I get messages that they leave me a voicemail there or something like that. But that's another example. It doesn't just have to be a password, or if there's like I said, a social security number, or if there's one specific piece of information that you use all the time, that's good for pinning.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Jeff. Well, this could almost become like the 1Password blog podcast there.
They actually do have a 1Password podcast, by the way. It's pretty good. I listen to it sometimes.
Ooh, okay. I might have to go and check that out. So maybe I'll put a link in the show notes. But we're not turning into that. It's just after everything that's been going on for so long now, especially with password managers. I mean, from the dawn of time, we've been saying it's a good way to go. But now with LastPass issues and the things and the stories that is continuing to come out and the break on this, it's like, you do need to take some time to make sure that you're safe. Certainly if you've been a LastPass user in the past, but then if nothing else, just make sure you've got a password manager. And right now, we're not alone in this. I think anybody from the Wired and CNET and the Wirecutter, like everybody is recommending, like you need to find one. And I think today it's between Bitwarden and 1Password are the two big options right now. Some people, by the way, will use their built-in password managers. I think Windows has one and Mac I know has one, the keychain. I'm still a little more comfortable using something outside of that ecosystem, but I know that a lot of people are using that. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any, if anybody out there has additional questions on 1Password, I guess you can just submit them to us and maybe we'll answer questions in a little time. All right, Jeff, thanks. I didn't think we'd had a lot to talk about, but this was so fun.
There you go.
Although I just hate it right now. If you can see, my background is, we've got snow up here in Ohio, and it was so nice to be last week in New Orleans where it was like 71 degrees every day. And beautiful sunshine. Definitely. I'm really missing New Orleans now. Anyway, great to talk with you again, Jeff, and we'll talk next week.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.